My name is Nick Wozni, and I lead KPMG's Controls Integration Solution. And Jonas Eberly will be joining me in the session, and he's one of the managing directors that leads a number of large-scale controls integration engagements here at KPMG. So before we get started on the content, let's just recap a little bit of administration. So we're going to use Poll Everywhere for the breakout session as well, except it's a different link. So please go ahead and load up the Poll EV link here. So it's pollev.com/controls2021. And we're going to ask 3 questions during the session. We'd really like to hear your input. And actually what we're going to do, because these focus on the controls subject, is, well, first of all, your responses are anonymous, and we're going to aggregate them and share the results with you. So you'll have some insight into your peers, at least at the aggregate level, after the session today. And during the breakout session, you can feel free to ask a question. There's kind of 2 ways you could do that. You can use the raise your hand function in WebEx, and to do that, you hover over your name, and there will be an icon for raising your hand. We'll be monitoring that during the session, and allow you to ask a question at the at a convenient time. As well, there's a Q&A box on my screen. It's at the bottom right, and we're going to be monitoring that as well today, and we'll get back to you on any questions that you have for us. So the last thing I was going to mention is if you have any technical latency in the broadcast, please go ahead and disable your video and make sure you stay in mute so we don't have background noise as we go through the content. So let's go ahead and begin. So as we talk through getting controls right in S/4HANA, we like to think of things in what we call the application risk framework. So these little honeycomb icons, you will have seen these if you joined our monthly webcast series for application risk. But these are all dimensions of getting security and controls right as you make the journey to S/4HANA and over the course of your ERP journey. And we're going to focus on the top center item today, controls integration. But we've actually titled this session Trusted Controls for SAP S/4HANA. So let me just make a couple of comments on the significance of the title. As your organization makes the major transformation of switching over to S/4HANA, you're going to be going through a lot of business transformation, and you're going to be touching a lot of parts of your business. And we like to think of it as not just the back office solution like the ERP of the past was. The modern ERP and S/4HANA is touching and not only touching but integrating the front office, middle office, and back office. So a lot more business stakeholders are using the information and relying on the ERP platform to conduct their operations. So they need to be able to have trust in the solution, that it has integrity. They need to be able to rely on the information that comes from it and make decisions. And then when you think of security and controls, during the general session, there was quite a bit of discussion around the key areas of the Sarbanes-Oxley requirements and other internal controls and audit requirements. So that's another key outcome of going to S4 that will be critical to your organization. So your external stakeholders need to be able to have trust and confidence in the solution as well. And controls are one of the key enablers of that trust. Let's go on to the next slide. And when we talk about getting controls right during your S/4HANA implementation, here's just some of the top comments that we hear our clients make, that these are some of the most important things. And I like to group these into 2 areas. One is making sure that your organization is able to address new risks that come along with the new technology and the new solution, and automating more of your business. Um, and then secondly, and um, somewhat more importantly, is to drive efficiency. As you go through this type of transformation, it's somewhat of a one-time shot for your organization to really transform internal controls, and to take a lot of those processes that are highly laborious, manual, pain points for your organization, and to use the transformation program as an opportunity to bring automation and drive efficiency, not just in how the controls are performed, but also on how you manage that compliance on an ongoing basis. So those are some of the top things that organizations look for to get right as part of controls in S4 HANA. But for today's session, going on to the next page, we're going to talk through, rather than talking broad on controls integration, we're going to go deep into three areas. And these are three really highly relevant topics that we think are important to, getting controls right and making sure you're covering the risks, but really also to drive efficiency. So there's going to be an undertone on both of those themes as we talk through these three topics. And by the way, we did host a few months ago a broader discussion about integrating controls into S4 HANA and the modern ERP, and you can see a replay of that session on our webcast. But I'll just kind of introduce the three topics, and then we'll go ahead and dive into them. So the first topic, and you're probably wondering, well, why are we going to talk about manual controls if S4 HANA is about automation? But inevitably, there are going to need to be some automated controls to apply manual judgment and to get input from the business and from stakeholders. And there's a technique that we call controls orchestration. So we're really excited to talk you through that, and we're finding that it addresses many of the really big pain points related to manual controls. Secondly is governance and organization. And we're going to talk through the three lines of defense concept and how your governance stakeholders can align and play the right role in your controls organization to enable transformation success. And then, finally, there was some really good mention of reliance on third parties in the first hour. And we call this the shared responsibility framework, where you integrate third-party risk into how you manage compliance going forward. So let's go ahead and dive into the topic. So first, let's talk about controls orchestration. So this topic, as I was mentioning, relates to manual controls. And what we find is that after you get controls right, the vast majority of pain points with technology in general, but specifically S4 HANA, is not the automated controls. Those are rarely the causes of control deficiencies. Those are rarely the causes of issues in processes and controls. Those are rarely audit findings. What tends to be the pain points are manual controls. And if traditional manual controls are implemented in traditional ways, we're seeing that the same challenges can creep back, and sometimes even to a greater scale. If more of your business is automated and more is in the technology and the data is more complex, the manual control pain points can be more complex. So here's some of the common challenges that we see. One is kind of the timing and scheduling. A control is supposed to happen within 10 days of the quarter end, but it doesn't happen, or there's miscommunications. We also see challenges in preparing and retaining documentation, and it always has a way of working its way out that if an email gets lost or a file doesn't get uploaded on a SharePoint, that happens to be the one sample that the auditors have selected, and then you're in control efficiency territory at that point. And then also another key dimension is that a lot of controls are designed centrally, but then dispersed out into the business units or assets. I work with some organizations that have several dozen or even several hundred performers that are out there doing the same control for their business or their asset. But how does the control owner centrally or even regionally have an understanding of what's happening out in the field and dispersed around the world? So what does that cause? It causes it can cause control issues or SOX failures. It can result in inefficiency or inconsistency, and then it can also lead to ambiguity. So let's bring this concept to life. And Jonas, do you want to talk through an example?
Sure. If we flip to the next slide, I think this is really brings this concept to life. If we just thinking about a typical manual control, maybe that is performed to Nick's point, decentrally maybe, but you have somewhat a central person that is responsible to keeping tabs on the execution of the controls, the monitoring of the controls performance, as well as retaining documentation. So what you see on this slide is really on the top left is the typical performance of the manual control. You have somewhat a an activity that involves a report generation as per certain intervals, let's say a month end or something. Then you go into like the labor intensive task of like reviewing the details of a certain activity. In this example, we have like assets that were changed or created. And then you're going through the manual step of like validating the use of the asset classes. Is it the right asset class? And then you're going through the follow-up on the exceptions, and then ultimately you're retaining some evidence and then package everything up that then demonstrate that you have performed the controls. If we think about controls orchestration, what I like really with that is, it brings to life the concept of how can I orchestrate various different stakeholders to make sure that I, at the end of the day, have a control performed the right way at the right timing with the right evidence. Secondly, if you think about controls orchestration also, we have maybe modernized our overall controls environment. So we're relying more on automated controls, but nevertheless, you will still have manual controls. And our way of thinking is how can we still enable more a digital footprint on executing these manual controls? And that helps really to understand what we're trying to do with showcasing on the bottom part here. So let's say we have now a solution in place that would maybe automatically generate the report for us out of the system using maybe robotics or process mining capabilities. And that functionality will generate a report for us that we then, on certain intervals, will send that report to a particular reviewer, but only on the exceptions. So we have automated the way on looking at like the vast majority of the data and really going more into exception-based follow-up sequences that will then be leveraging technology to maybe send that report, that exception report, to my different business units for their review. And they can then perform their review offline or online in the solution. We would at the same time have a solution to maybe monitoring the activity and maybe alerting us at certain intervals saying, hey, we've sent this out to you for review, but you haven't completed the review activity. Let's follow up systematically on making sure that you have actually received the data and you have follow up on the data. Because again, this is all manual, and the nature of these manual controls, it is sometimes that you maybe have a human error, or if people don't see the message, or maybe people just are too busy in their day-to-day activities that they haven't had the time to perform the control. So leveraging a technology, again, could help us to automatically and systematically follow up on these, making sure that every single review is being performed and that we have closure to these. Lastly, we then be able to package all this into a centralized repository maybe, and then have this automatically being retained in a system of record. And that's really what we're looking at from a controls orchestration perspective. So what we have now is really a couple of things. One, uh, we have achieved that we're looking more into exception-based reports. We have leveraged technology to maybe look at the vast majority of our transactional data. So we have a much better precision level and much better completeness perspective from our population. And thirdly, we have leveraged technology to really help us to making sure that we follow up timely and we retaining the evidence in a more complete and digital manner. Nick, anything else you want to add on this or questions so far?
Yeah, I mean, great overview. I mean, I love this example because it takes, a real painful process that, we've seen time and time again, not be problematic overall, but it'll have, a handful of problems over the course of the year, not just in performing, but also in auditing. So, this is a great candidate to bring orchestration into play. And another thing maybe to point out is that we don't necessarily need to wait for S/4HANA. We're seeing companies take platforms that have workflow embedded. Some companies are using SAP Process Control, if that's a tool you have. Others are using a platform like ServiceNow, which has great workflow and mobility, and it's very accessible. And others use RPA or SharePoint. There's tons of enablers that can make this concept work. So let's advance. I guess next we have a polling question. Just kind of curious to get feedback from your, with respect to your organization and pain points related to manual controls. Well, just in the interest of time, as you're answering that question, let's go ahead and start the next topic, Jonas, and we can relay some of the information as it comes in.
All right, let's talk about, if we can go to the next section. So this is really talking about the aligning the different controls, aligning your controls organization to enable success. So this is really recapping. Most of you are probably familiar with the term of 3 lines of defense. This is just like a recap on like the major definition of how we see the 3 lines of defense. Starting with the first line is really the risk owner, performer, that they are the control performers. Second line of defense, oftentimes the management functions, setting the standards, setting the policies, and the third line is really the independence monitoring. Like this, like internal audit function that is somewhat independent of the second and first line of defense. So if you go to the next slide, just to illustrate, when we're thinking about talking about a controls or a project, a transformation and type of project, what we oftentimes hear from our clients is the question, how do we embed actually, let's say, our internal audit function with our second line and our first line in terms of like setting up a work stream that making sure that we have controls embedded throughout the project lifecycle, making sure that we not only have controls from a SDLC perspective or project perspective embedded, but also designing controls within the new processes, as well as making sure that we following along a systematic and controlled life cycle from like the design, build, test, deploy activity. So what you see on this slide is really a controls team would really integrate well with the first and second line of defense, which would really be interfacing with the management function as well as your functional teams that you see on the right hand side, like your your functional teams on record to report, or the process side, the purchase to pay side, as well as on your technology side. But then also making sure that you have a tie into your third line, your independence group that is has an oversight functionality in terms of like making sure that they have aligning with you on your approach as well as on your future design of the controls. So that's really where we see typically the controls team, how they would fit into like an overall a program structure, to making sure that this way you have controls embedded from the beginning and throughout the entire project lifecycle, and that your controls are being embedded as you're designing the future state. Turning to the next question, next slide. So just the next poll question, how your controls team developing to address new risks from the future ERP and digital technologies. So just if you can go through the poll everywhere question and just give us some response to this.
Yeah, thanks, Jonas. So as everyone's answering the question, we'll go ahead and start talking about the third topic, the area of shared responsibility. And as y'all heard from Teresa from Liberty Utilities in the first hour, there were some really key challenges that she highlighted related to challenges and considerations for reliance on third parties. So, just to kind of level set how technology is changing, on the left side, we have the traditional ERP platform, which tended to be one big on-premise, large integrated box. And now organizations are moving to best of breed or to the modern ERP landscape, where we have lots of integrated technologies that are selected by the different functions. But a lot of these are actually provided by third parties and hosted by third parties. So that means that we have a greater requirement to integrate third parties into our governance function and processes. Now, and going on the next page, so for those of you technologists that are on the call too, this doesn't just affect business processes, it also affects IT. So even if you take a system like S4HANA, instead of hosting it on premise, the vast majority of our clients are hosting S4HANA and other parts of their technology landscape for that matter in the cloud. So there's infrastructure as a service that helps your organization get out of the business of maintaining hardware and elements of the technology. There's platform as a service where the provider can be engaged to not only host but to provide and support the database and parts of the infrastructure. Although these don't change the functionality per se, you become subject to regular requirements to perform upgrades and to match the technical specs of your provider. This leads to business requirements to get more frequent assurance and testing over the application. And then, of course, as software as a service, the application level is owned by a third party, and there still ends up being responsibility for your organization. Let's advance 2 slides. The one I'm skipping is just showing an end-to-end process and how it can really bounce over across about 4 or 5 different service providers. But the concept of shared responsibility isn't new. On the left side, this might look kind of like your end-to-end processes prior to moving to S4HANA in the cloud, where you might have a provider or two that often supports a discrete part of the process. Maybe it's payroll, maybe it's something with banking, for instance. And we're used to doing things periodically in this model. Now, as you move more and more of your processes to an integrated cloud architecture, there's a lot more touch points, between processes because of the connectivity, and then B, across third parties. So let's advance to 2 slides again. There's a few takeaways I wanted to highlight in our remaining couple of minutes. So due to the increased reliance on third parties, it's important to understand the interdependencies and think of things across end-to-end processes. Secondly, it's important to define ownership and accountabilities. And one of the things I like to remind my clients here is that you can outsource support of an activity, but you can't outsource accountability. So that means that your organization still needs to have governance and accountability over areas that are outsourced to a third party. Third, change your change management. So how is your organization going to stay well informed of the impact of changes that are driven by third parties? And then finally, just to sum it up, make sure that third-party governance becomes integrated and proactive. So there is one more polling question. Let's go ahead and please go ahead and answer that question on Poll Everywhere. And then, Jason, do you mind showing the link one more time so everybody can select the link for their next breakout session? And Jonas and I just wanted to say thank you for joining. Our contact information will be provided in the follow-up email, and we'd love to continue the discussion with you. So thank you for joining today. And if you're still on, make sure you check out of the Poll Everywhere.
Thank you. And just to confirm, it should be the same link for sorry, you should have the link for the next session. I'm not able to share it, just so you know.
Okay. Yeah, they are listed on that visit kpmg.com